What's up, my dear Ælis enthusiasts? My name is Bins, and I welcome you to the 31st video in the Ælis tutorial series. When I started this series, I never thought I'd get this far. If I keep this up, I might actually start considering Ælis to be a real language one day. Nah, just kidding. Ælis is the only language everyone should be speaking anyway. Now, I know there's only a handful of you watching, but that makes it more than worth it. So thank you for swinging by from time to time and leaving a nice comment, whether it be here on YouTube in the comments section or on social media where I share these videos. I really do appreciate it. In video 11, we started exploring the syntax and the holy trinity of the topic, agent, and patient trio. Well, we'll slightly stick to the theme today, as we'll be talking about morphosyntactic structure and terminology. What I'd like to do is make a quote-unquote vertical analysis of Ælis's morphosyntactic structure, which means taking a metaphorical magnifying glass to look at the smallest semantic component and zoom out until we get to the text level. Therefore, like the title of the video says, morphosyntactic structure and terminology of Ælis, from root word to text. In the grand scheme of things, Ælis distinguishes 6 morphosyntactic levels. On the first level, we find the root word. The root word is the smallest semantic component. We can also find the liska on this level. Technically, there is a level below the root word, as a root word consists of letters or phonemes. So the letters are the smallest syntactical unit, but the root word is the smallest meaningful unit. For this reason, we could actually place the liska on both these levels. Liska are meaningful units, but they can't be split into components themselves. On the second level, we find partitions as well as the partition markers. We'll get to explaining more in detail what each term means, but for now, I'd like to just gloss over the different levels there are and the different units that exist on each level. The third level is the word level. It is also home to the function markers. On the fourth level, we find constituents, and level 5 is the sentence level. This level also contains the separator marker. The sixth level, finally, is the text level. I would like you to pay special attention to the terms word, constituent, and sentence. These terms also exist in English, but are defined notably differently than when we talk about the Ælis morphosyntax. So keep in mind that when I use these words, especially in this video, that they mean something different than what you're probably used to, alright? So we'll start at the lowest level and work our way upwards. We'll determine how many units of a level we need to create a valid unit on the next level. For the sake of consistency, I'll use a color scheme in which orange means that we'll need an exact number of units, a blue color if we need at least a certain amount of units, or green when the units are optional. Let's start at the lowest level. A valid root word consists of either 2 or 3 letters. There are 5 valid root word structures: consonant-vowel, vowel-consonant, vowel-vowel, consonant-vowel-vowel, and consonant-vowel-consonant. Technically, a root word can consist of any amount of letters, but then this root isn't found in the Ælis root word thesaurus. It could be a proper name, like for example, Bins. But then that name would have to be enclosed in name symbols, like we discussed in video 8, I believe. It is also possible that a root word consists of just one letter, without it being a liska. For example, the letter O can be a root word, but even then it would either have to be preceded explicitly by the root word re, which means name or designation, or again, at least it would have to be enclosed in name symbols. For the first case, for example, we might find the word tureo, which is the Ælis word for the chemical element oxygen. An example of the latter might be anreo, which would be the proper transcription of several towns called O in Norway and Sweden. They exist, look it up. The difference between both approaches, by the way, whether to use either the name symbols or the literal root word re, has to do with the notion of identity. The element oxygen isn't internationally named O. It's not a unique identity, but rather a designation for this element solely in Ælis. The latter example, on the other hand, is a proper given name of an entity. Either way, these situations are exceptional. In all normal cases, a root word in Ælis will consist of either 2 or 3 letters of the alphabet, as discussed before. On level 2, we have the partitions. A partition must consist of at least one root word. Liska can optionally be added, but a partition cannot exist solely of Liska. Given names are again an exception, but otherwise a partition needs at least one ordinary root word, which means at least one root word of class 1 or class 2. These classes were dealt with in the previous video. Next, a word in Ælis needs to consist of at least one partition. An example of a valid word is veira, which means value. A partition marker is optional. For example, we could prefix m to force the word to become an adjective-like word, like valuable. If an Ælis word consists of 2 partitions, then it needs at least one partition marker. This must be the case per definition because, after all, it's the presence of a partition marker that splits a word into separate partitions in the first place. For example, Anuai ara em veira, a valuable house. As a logical consequence, the amount of partition markers must be, at the least, one fewer than the amount of partitions. A word with 3 partitions will have to have at least 2 markers. A word with 4 partitions has at least 3 markers, etc. On the other hand, there is no upper limit to the amount of partition markers that a single word can have, like this example, which is also considered to be one single word in Ælis, which consists of 3 partitions, but has no less than 6 partition markers. The bottom line, though, is that a word needs to consist of at least one partition. And this is the first term where the Ælis definition differs from our English one, so keep this in mind. What we call a word in Ælis can consist of a theoretical infinite number of partitions and partition markers, and can therefore theoretically be infinitely long, while it is still considered to be one single word. Okay? Then, if we have exactly one word and combine it with exactly one function marker, we get a constituent. This is the definition of a constituent. One word in combination with one function marker equals one constituent. For example, vak is just a word. But if we turn it into havak, then it becomes a constituent. The 5th level is the sentence level. A sentence in Ælis needs to consist of at least one constituent. Let's retrieve the dog. This is not just a constituent, but also a valid sentence. Havak, there's a dog, or it's a dog. A sentence can consist of one constituent, but it can also have more. Ja aite havak, I have a dog. 2 constituents, 1 sentence. Easy, right? The last level is fairly easy. It's the same in any language. A text requires at least 1 sentence. Makes sense, right? But here's where it does change slightly. The thing that constitutes where one sentence ends and the next one begins is a full stop at the end of a sentence. This is the case in English, and I guess with only a handful of exceptions, all languages in the world. But not in Ælis. In Ælis, it's the separator marker. Like with the partitions and the partition markers, the amount of sentences is determined by the amount of separators per definition. For example, these are 2 distinct sentences. If we want to write them one after the other in a text, then we put the separator in between. I have a dog. His name is Boomer. If we didn't do that, we would only have 1 sentence, and due to the workings of the Ælis syntax, that would jumble up the meaning completely. In this case, the utterance would mean it and I have a dog, and we are both named Boomer. Now, that's grammatically valid, but what? So just do yourself and everybody else a favor and put a separator between 2 sentences if you want them to belong to the same paragraph. So, in summary, a text has at least 1 sentence. A sentence consists of at least 1 constituent. A constituent consists of exactly 1 word combined with 1 function marker. A word consists of at least 1 partition. A partition consists of at least 1 root word and apart from the exceptions we talked about, a root word consists of either 2 or 3 letters. Let's work our way upwards again. Ni is a root word. It is also a partition. Since partition markers are optional, it is also a valid word. In order to become a constituent, it requires a function marker, so ha-ni, for example, is a valid constituent. We only require one constituent to form a valid sentence, therefore, this is also a sentence. There is a woman. And if a text consists of only one sentence, we don't require any separators. So this is also a valid text. Quite possibly the most boring and uneventful story I've ever heard, but you get the idea. Now theoretically, we could throw out the function marker ha in this case, because we're dealing with a one-word sentence, but I'll keep that for another time. For the sake of simplicity, let's assume for now that the function marker is always obligatory. Let's look at a small text I've cooked up. Don't worry, we're not going to analyze its semantics. We're just going to look at the macro and micro morphosyntactic structure. In order to know the amount of sentences, we count the amount of separators. So, there's 1. There's 2. There's 3. Hold it. The separators can function on both the word and sentence levels, remember? In order for it to be functional on the sentence level, the next root word must be a function marker. Otherwise, the separator functions as a partition marker. So no separate sentence here. The last one is okay though. So that makes 4 sentences split by 3 separators. Let's now take the longest of these sentences and drill down a level. We can find out the amount of constituents if we count the amount of function markers, right? So that's ia, ha, ir, ia, and ha. 6 constituents, right? But, no, wait, we overlooked something else. There is a sentence bracket right here. That means that everything inside the bracket is part of the same constituent. There, that's much better. Each constituent consists of 1 function marker and 1 word. 1 function marker, 1 word. Let's take the longest word and dig down to the partition level. We have 2 partition markers, m, and therefore 3 partitions. The second partition starts with yi, which is technically also a partition marker, but there's a thing I haven't talked to you about yet called partition marker ranks, and due to that mechanic we can regard yi to be a part of the partition here. I'll explain partition marker ranks some other time. So, 3 partitions, 2 markers. The first partition is made up of 3 root words, 2 ordinary 2-letter ones, and 1 number concept i. The second partition consists of 4 root words, of which 3 ordinary ones and again, Æliska. The third partition also has 3 root words, 2 ordinary, 1 liska. And with that, we're at the bottom level. These are the 6 semantic levels of Ælis's morphosyntax. This is background info, and on one hand, I do apologize if you don't like this type of theoretical grammar. On the other hand, this knowledge can contribute to an increased transparency when you encounter an Ælis text or utterance, and you'll also be extra aware of what I exactly mean when I use terms like root word, partition, function marker, and especially the terms that also exist in English grammar but mean something else, like word, constituent, or sentence. This concludes the 31st episode in the Ælis tutorial series, and even if theoretical grammar is not up your alley, I hope you found it interesting. Thanks again for your feedback and kind comments. If you have any questions or suggestions on what to do next, I'm sure you'll know how to find me. And if you don't want to miss out on future videos, consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, thank you for watching. Bins out. Na orasa.